Hello ladies and gentlemen, talking about update 1.53 again, going over the other stuff. Last time we looked at the vehicles and the new engine and basically what it brings to the game, so if you want to check that, I believe I uploaded it a few days ago. So now we're on to locations and missions, which is next in the changelog. I've already talked about Stalingrad and Advance to the Rhine, so if you want to check out those videos, they came out last week. They were both map analysis videos. And then we have New Guinea. New aircraft missions and domination ground strike missions, always nice to see. Spain, new aircraft missions for alternative history mode. Once again, always nice to see new types of, well, maybe not new types of missions, but more just different missions when it comes to any map. New system of destructible environments for locations Berlin, Stalingrad, and Advance to the Rhine has been added. I've talked about this before. I talked about it in the last video, but to be quite honest, I think there needs to be more. There needs to be more destruction. Like you should be able to flatten the city, because if you only have certain buildings which are able to be destroyed, then it's very nice to see them and they look very, cool and everything like that, but they don't really affect a lot of stuff. It would also be nice to have buildings where if you hit them, they maybe block off ways, or maybe you can destroy rubble and it opens up other roads. Maybe you can destroy a house and it means that you can go through it now, and it creates another line to go through, another point of attack or something like that. But overall, I wish it was like Bad Company. Battlefield Bad Company, and the way that the destructible environments worked in that, because you would start off with a nice village, and then when you were done with it, there was nothing left. And that's basically how it worked. The only thing that would be left would be the foundation of the houses. So I hope that gets put into the game. Maybe this is the first step, but it really depends on how far they want to take it. The next one is a player that has landed on an enemy airfield will be considered as captured and his aircraft destroyed. So you can't just, BM, or you... there was a cheeky tactic about maybe, I don't know, how long was this? Maybe about a year ago that some people used to do in some of the big heavy bombers, like the B-17s, the G-8s, stuff like that. And they would go over enemy airfields, kill all of the AA, and then just land on them. And just sit there, wait for people to come back to repair or whatever, and shoot them down using their gunners. So I don't think it was very much an issue now, like it was back then. But I suppose it makes sense. I mean, if you were in a realistic scenario in World War II and you decided to go and land on an enemy airfield, the crew and the people who are waiting for the guys to come home, they're not just going to be like, oh, well, nice to see you, we'll leave you be, have fun. So I suppose it's kind of a weird little change, but it's I suppose if you want to be technical, it adds to the realism of the game. So game mechanics, there's a lot of big stuff in here. There's also a lot of just stuff I don't really care about. In SB ground vehicles, the gunner view is now situated where the sight was physically mounted on specific ground vehicles. This is nice. Once again, it's another step in the right direction for realism. The issue is it's not there yet. I would much rather prefer this to be on planes, since it is definitely an issue in simulators still, with bombers basically wrecking everything because they have the 360 view, because they don't have the cockpit. They can use any gunners instead of just using one gunner, so you can get about 4 or 5 people shooting. And even maybe you just let your AI shoot people down, because, well, it's easier for them to shoot you down than generally it is for a pilot to take out a bomber. So it's nice to see it happen in ground vehicles. Once again, it adds to the realism, but it's only on specific ones. Hopefully it's kind of like when it came to the machine guns, when certain ones were turned on with certain tanks and vehicles, and then eventually now, which is another point they've talked about in the changelog, is that now everything that had a machine gun or has a machine gun port with a machine gun in it, now it can fire. So hopefully with this gunner view idea, it's expanded to include everything. instead of just certain ground vehicles. I'm guessing this is how they test stuff. They just add it to certain things. If it works well in the game, they expand it and put it on everything. It seems to be how they're doing most things nowadays. One of the examples is this, the physically mounted, basically your view is of the physically mounted gun, the physically mounted sight. The other thing is the destructible environments. They've only put it in 3 maps, and I'm guessing it will be added to others as it goes along where it's needed. So it's kind of like, it's a test period, and it seems to happen with a lot of stuff in game. And it's quite hard to, it's quite hard to basically be like, well, that's not a good idea because you should just throw everything at us at once and hope that it all works. I don't mind the whole testing thing, I just wish that the dev server was used more when it comes to stuff like this. But anyway, we'll get on to the next one. New mechanism for measuring target distance for RB and SB game modes with new modification rangefinder, which has been added for ground vehicles that were equipped with a mounted rangefinder. I think this is fine. Once again, it adds to the realism. It's nice that it's something that I'll get into a bit later on when we get to something else. But it's nice to see that they've realised that certain tanks or vehicles had advantages over others. Basically because of what they were equipped with in the war, instead of just having a blanket, everybody gets it. So the next one is added a new award, vehicle for rent. It's nice, I suppose. I'm still not sold on the battle trophy system. It's nice to get something every day for logging in, but yeah, I don't know. It's a system that I wouldn't miss, and it's a system that I hardly know that's there because I don't really use it. So the next one, the in-game chat has been changed, general channels have been removed, the ability to create public and private channels has been added. That's always lovely. That's always nice to have. So it basically means that there's more variety, or if people want to set stuff up, they're able to. So, it's a little change, but when it comes to being able to communicate with people, it's always nice. And then there's experimental voice chat support for Linux and Mac. I believe the PC, the Windows version has voice control. I generally use TeamSpeak, so therefore it doesn't really affect me. But I remember months ago when I would, talk to people who didn't have TeamSpeak or weren't on the server, it worked then. So I don't know why it wouldn't work now in game. But it's nice to see that everybody is getting the voice chat stuff. Especially Mac users, because they seem to kind of get the short end of the stick a lot of the time when it comes to a lot of games. So the next one, in combined ground vehicle realistic battles, new special markers have been added. The marker will be visible for ground forces above the point where the tank was hit and will not move if the enemy moves. This kind of annoys me because it takes away realism from realistic battles. If I shot somebody, let's say I'm in World War II, I'm in my Sherman, I'm dodging along, there's, I don't know, a Panzer IV down the road, I shoot it, God or whoever does not, or I don't know, the US Army doesn't paint a massive arrow on top of his head saying, hey look, he's here. What you would do is you would radio saying, hey look, he's over here, or maybe somebody would see the shot and therefore they would look in the general direction and go, oh shit, there's a tank there. I don't like this feature because it takes away from realism, which is something that needs to be held up when we're looking at realistic battles. Now, what I would prefer to have is something like the system we actually have before, where basically you can say, look at the designated grid square. I think that's good, because it doesn't mean that a tanker is doomed once he gets shot, because the arrow is directly over him. If he moves, you still know he's in that 10 meters, somewhere there. I like the idea of having the look at the map, look over here, because it's the circle is big enough to cover an area that the tank could be anywhere in. So therefore you don't just give away the enemy's position straight away. I understand why they've done this, because the mechanics and the game mode in itself inherently favours defenders, if you decide to be defensive. So to try and counter that, this is what they've done. But once again, if it's in arcade, fair enough. I don't really mind. Arcade is supposed to be arcadey, and it is, and it's fun if you want to play like that. For me personally, I like playing realistic games, and to see changes like this, for me personally, it makes War Thunder look like it's going away from that realism angle. I mean, the fact that they changed historic battles to realistic battles, now that they're adding stuff like this in, are we going to see realistic battles turn into, pro arcade battles or something, or arcade, like realistic arcade battles or something like that? It's not a good thing, for me personally. What I would love, looking for an alternative if they want to go down this route. I know it would be a hell of a lot of work and quite hard to implement, maybe impossible to implement, but let's say you have a radius of where you can communicate with people using a radio in your tank, and I understand that certain tanks don't have radios, therefore this feature would not be for them, but therefore it would be realistic, simple as that. But what you do is, in this radius, you can communicate with the tanks around you. So if you fire a shot, or if you see someone, you get someone over the radio saying, look at that house, or over there's a tank near that house. Look at the barn, there's a tank, Panzer IV. And maybe, if you see it for a longer time, you get more information down the radio to your teammates. So maybe, if you only see them for a second, or maybe on your first shot, it just goes, target spotted. So you know that one of your allies has seen an enemy, and then maybe you see him for an extra 5 seconds, and then you take another shot, or something like that, and it goes, it's a Panzer IV, or it's a Tiger, and then you stay there and you wait another 10 seconds, you take another shot, and then maybe it goes, he's over by the barn, something like that. So therefore it adds that realism to it. You have a radio in your head. It's what I've talked about before with aircraft. I think it's something that's really missing in aircraft, where you have voice commands instead of just these prompty things. It would be much better to have basically somebody talking to you on a radio, telling you stuff that's going on. Just because, I don't know, it just adds to it. It makes it feel real, instead of having to read everywhere, or look at arrows, or look at a map. It's much better to have voice communications and stuff like that. So that would be a system I would, if I was in charge, I would try and implement. I mean, it's a system that would be very, very hard to implement, because of just the amount of scenarios that it has, and therefore the amount of different things that can happen. You'd have to record a hell of a lot of lines, and they would only have to work in certain times, and then you have to work out, well, what diameter does it have to be to the house, or anything like that. Maybe it says something like, Sherman here, Sherman here to your right, there's a Tiger in front, something like that. But there's a lot to think about when it comes to that idea, and unless somebody approaches me about it, then it's probably not going to be fully fledged unless I put time into it. But I still think that's a better system than this silly marker system, which should never be in realistic battles or simulator battles, because they're supposed to be realistic, and this ain't realistic at all. So the next one, a pilot may lose control of the aircraft if maximum G is exceeded. The amount of G and time during which the pilot still has control over the aircraft depend on the skill of the pilot. When I first heard about this change, I was kind of worried. I didn't know what extent it was going to get to. But I actually think this is a good change. And the reason I say that is because you don't really break your wings anymore. When it comes to planes, you still have the issue with larger aircraft because you don't have to exceed a lot of Gs before you break stuff. But when it comes to fighters and things like that, you generally lose control before you break your wings. And therefore you'll do a more gradual turn, or instead of a full-fledged 15G turn. Now this may be a real issue in jets or something like that, but I don't really play jets. I play prop aircraft. At least mostly. And therefore, for me, this is once again more realistic. It means that people can't pull these ridiculous turns at certain speeds because they know that their aircraft wings are not going to rip, which they should never do anyway when it comes to realism. But now you have a control in the way, which is this lose control. Now the thing is, it's affected by skill of the pilot, so therefore it should get better over time. It actually means that G tolerance has an actual meaning in the skill tree for your crew. I thought it never really had any use, but now it actually does. So it's nice to see them incorporating stuff which actually makes sense and adds to the game. There's still a few issues with it, I think. There has been quite a few times where I'm kind of stuck in lose control for 20 seconds or so, and I just can't get out of it, and I have no idea why. Maybe it's a bug or something, but I'll be flying in a straight line and then lose control. So, maybe that's just me. Maybe I was going too fast in a straight line, I don't know. But if that isn't the case for anybody else, then I think it's a good system. One of the things there is an issue with is straight away, after gaining control again, you snap to wherever you're looking. So, maybe you're in a Yak 9 or a 0 and you're used to turning that ridiculous amount, and you're used to pulling like 12 Gs or something like that. And generally in Yaks, pulling 10, 11 Gs now, I can still pull without losing control. But at 12G, that's about where it goes. So once you lose control, you still move in the direction you were moving in. But it's a much more gradual pace because, well, your pilot's trying to get back to reality, and he's trying to gain control again in the situation. But when the lose control goes, you snap to where you were going to go anyway. And for me, that little snap would be higher G than what you were doing before, even if it is a very, very small amount of time to the pilot, and you'd probably break his neck. So I think that has to be looked at. And maybe some idea can be come up with to try and combat that, but overall I think it's a good mechanic that should be in the game, just to, well, stop people going on about breaking their wings because they're trying to pull 15G turns and wondering why their wings break. But anyway, next one, fuse settings have been changed in all game modes. Attacker fuse has been implemented. Time ticks down once the bomb is dropped. Time is shown in pop-up tips, it's 5 seconds. For the fuses with permanent delay, time ticks down when the bomb hits the obstacle. Minimum setting is 5 seconds. I'm fine with this. The only thing it really affects is bombs which would explode on impact, which there were bombs out there which did that, obviously. So maybe it would be nice to see certain types of bombs which actually, when they hit, they explode on impact, because it can be a real bitch trying to kill ships now. Because you drop your bombs and then guess what? The ship moves. Same with like tanks and stuff, but the main issue I've had is ships, because the bombs seem to go through the ships, hit the water, and then they hit the wall. So they go through the ship, hit the water, and then explode under the ship, instead of just hitting the ship. It's incredibly annoying when it comes to that. But it's not that much of a big deal. You don't really see a lot of people bombing ships nowadays, because, well, it's quite hard to do. But I think there should be an on-impact prompt, especially for certain bombs, or maybe certain maps, I don't know. But, it's nice to have this fuse thing. Makes it more realistic, yada yada yada. Dropping bombs from the HG-111 has been fixed. Now the bombs don't fall out of the back of the fuselage, but strictly from the bomb bay. I don't even know how this even happened with it, or whoever designed this. This is what they were like. Oh yeah, this is all right. We'll just drop them out the tail, because it means that the bombs don't actually go to where the target is, especially when you've got that delay on dropping bombs now. So most of the time in HE-111s, you would miss. So hopefully now, this is a slight fix. Hopefully they actually drop where they're supposed to, if that makes sense. But I'll have to test it. It's something that was very prevalent in the H3 and the H6. So I'll have to have a look. And there's some of my favourite planes to fly in game. They're not the best by far, but I love how they look. I love their relevance to history and all that stuff. So yeah, I'll have a look on that. I hope the bombs get dropped where they're supposed to. But anyway, the next one on game mechanics, the last one, is maximum zoom for optics and binocular has been changed for tank optics from 7.5 times to times 3.5, and for binoculars from 9 to 6. This represents the most popular setting for tank optics in the 1930s and 50s. In the future, these values will be set to historically accurate values to individual vehicle optics. So the thing is, I'm not sure this change should have been implemented before they've done it historically accurate, because there are a lot of tanks which lose out here, which had those optics, which other tanks didn't have. It's nice to see they're not just changing everything to the average and then just leaving it there. Eventually they're going to change the values to the historical accurate values, but I don't know why they've decided to lower it. I think it may be something to do with big tank destroyers or big guns having an advantage over, like the classic example for me is the Tiger 1 versus the Sherman 76, where the Tiger 1 can shoot a hell of a lot farther than the Sherman 76, or at least accurately at longer range. So maybe they've done this just to combat that at the moment, which makes sense. But I don't like the fact that they've averaged everything, just because there are tanks out there which had historical advantages because of these optics. Now, it depends how long it takes them to set them to the historical accurate values. If they wait until 1.55 or 1.57, then I think it's going to be an issue. And it's also going to affect the way that people play. But we'll see. Right now, I think it's fair enough dropping it, just for now. But if they leave it for like that for too long, then I think there's going to be issues. We'll see how long it takes them, and we'll see the interesting backlash that's going to happen when the tanks and the ground vehicles and everything like that actually do get their historically accurate values, because some people are always going to complain about stuff like that. There was also the crew skill system update. I'm not going to go into it. I think it's, just as a conclusion, I think it's a lot better than the old system. It makes it less technical, but it does exactly the same job, especially for ground vehicles. It was ridiculous with ground vehicles, so it's nice to see. If you want to have a look at them, go on the changelog. Visibility mechanics have been updated. This is something I want to do a video on in itself, so I'll wait for that. We also have changes in vehicle models, basically just making them basically look a bit better, or at least a bit more realistic, mainly tanks, but you've got to remember, because of the new engine, everything looks different now. This is just stuff like, with a lot of the vehicles, it's the layout of the modules, especially when it comes to ground vehicles. The only thing that was changed in the air, I believe, is the P-38G and the XP-38G. So, if you want the full list, once again, the changelog is in the description, so you can have a look. But it's not that massive, really, when it comes to it. There's changes in locations and missions. Basically, they've changed spawn points and where stuff is on most of the missions to try and balance them. They're not going to be able to balance them because I still stick to the point that you cannot balance ground forces, and you never will be able to. So good luck with that. But yeah, basically, once again, if you want to have a look at them, go to the changelog. There's a lot of changes, and to get through them all, I would have to look at every map individually. I may do it on some maps, but so far I haven't seen many differences when I've actually played them on the actual server. So we'll see. Research and economy. The vampire and the venom have been moved to the Tempest line. Fair enough. There's not much. There's not a lot to say to that. Basically, they shouldn't really be there, in my opinion. But the reason that they've done it is so the British tree looks balanced, and so you don't get focused on just playing around one line. But technically it shouldn't be there because it's different companies, but that's just how it is. The Calliope's been moved to rank 3 without changing its BR. I believe they've done this so it just lines up with the Pershing with the rocket, so you have to buy the Calliope for the Sherman, for the Pershing. The Panzer III Aus M has been moved to rank 2 without changing its BR, so it doesn't really matter. A lot of damage models have been changed. Well, actually no, they haven't individually been changed, but basically what has happened with it is that a lot of components of tanks have been changed, so therefore it affects all tanks, or most tanks anyway. So one of them is that affecting all ground vehicles which load ammunition projectiles and charges separately, the chance of ammo rack explosions has been significantly decreased. An ammo rack can be destroyed by direct hit or close explosion of ammo containing 150 grams or more of explosives. An ammo rack is still vulnerable to all damage, including spalling. Sorry about that. So therefore, it's harder to blow them up. But that's really about it. There's not really much else to talk about. There's a lot of tanks out there which have 150 grams or more of explosive in their shots, mainly Tier 4 and 5 Russian and German tanks. So where it is an issue, it's not really going to change. But you know, I mean, I suppose it gives lower players, players who play in the lower tiers, they don't just get one shot all the time because people know where the ammo rack is. So that's nice. I still think certain historical things should be implemented, especially with certain tanks such as the Shermans, where some of the models actually had like ammo dampening in a way, or they were stored so it was very hard for the ammo to blow up. But we'll see. In the T-34 series, a hit on the oil tank can no longer lead to a fuel tank explosion. Okay, fair enough, that doesn't really make sense. But maybe if you hit the oil tank, maybe that could explode. I know that it's a lot harder to ignite oil, but it's still possible. Maybe if you hit the oil tank, it should shut down the engine, or maybe flood the engine, therefore the fuel is screwed anyway. Maybe you can't move, something like that. Maybe make it a bit realistic instead of just saying it doesn't blow up. I don't know. But anyway, the next one, the mechanics regarding repairing has been changed. Now Trax repair will start automatically if the vehicle does not move. I like this one. It basically means that it takes the onus off you to start the repair, it'll just do it automatically. It's a nice little thing, you can focus on the battle instead of where the hell's my track gone. To activate repair mode, you will need to hold the repair button for 1.5 seconds. Once again, completely fine. Generally, it doesn't really affect the combat if you have to hold it down. It just basically means that you know that you're going to repair, instead of maybe pressing the button by accident when you're in a vulnerable position. Where with this, if you start pressing it and then realize, oh, maybe I should get behind that hill, then you stop pressing it, then, there's basically a time where you can just, where you have a bit of leeway and not getting stuck in the position. Reload on capture and base points now starts automatically if the player doesn't move and will be interrupted if he starts to move. That's fine, once again. as long as it doesn't load more than I want, which is, if it loads max ammo when I've only taken half, then I'll be annoyed, but it doesn't do that. So as long as I keep that out there, obviously it just makes the gameplay more streamlined. It's something to, it's a small thing that you don't have to worry about. The penetration of late war as well as post-war AP shells with discarding sabos has been fixed and adjusted. So, here we go. The USSR, all of the late war, post-war guns have been increased, apart from the 85mm BR-36-7P penetration, which has been decreased by 4%. The USA, let's see. Everything has been decreased by quite a large amount for certain things, such as the 90mm, which is one of my favourite guns. The everything has been decreased apart from the 105 M39 2A2. So, USSR got a buff, not a big one, but a buff. A lot of the USA tanks, now that they couldn't pen stuff, now can't even pen stuff harder. The 90mm, which is present on the Pershing, the penetration has been decreased by 13.2%. So now you can just stare at Tiger IIs. I mean, I feel so bad for that tank. The Pershing is one of my favourite non-British tanks. And it's just got shafted into the ground because of stuff like this. And the thing is, they haven't... A lot of the stuff that they've done later on, they've actually, like the changes to ground vehicles, they've actually given the source, so you can have a look and see, oh yeah, fair enough, it says this. For this shit, for the damage model crap, and the changes in penetration for the AP shells, they haven't. And that means, to me, that because they haven't added them in, they're doing it to balance the game, therefore taking it away from historical accuracies. And therefore they're trying to balance the game around guns. And basically saying, this is increased by 5%, this is decreased by 5%, this should solve the issue. And the thing is, no, you are trying to create a realistic game. If you want to do this shit in arcade, fair enough. But don't make it... Well, basically, just don't do it in realistic and simulator, where it's supposed to be realistic and simulated. You are making up values here for guns. You are not going off historical data. It says nowhere that you're doing that. There is no reason for you to not add in the sources that you're using for this. So therefore I must believe you are not using sources. The fact that you are using percentages instead of actual numbers shows to me that you are not using sources. You are basically just going, this gun we feel is penetrating a bit too much, so we need to decrease it by a little bit. And I'm not okay with that. I'm fine with you pulling sources out your ass and changing something because of it. Because that's what the game should be. You've even said yourself that's what the game should be. But if you start balancing stuff by what's going on in the game, then it is not a simulator anymore. It is not a realistic game anymore. It is an arcade game. Because you are trying to make sure that everything is balanced, which cannot happen in a game like this, especially when it comes to ground vehicles. So this shit, when it comes to changing penetration values, that really irks me. It really does. But anyway, we'll move on. We'll see if they pull stuff out their ass to show why this has changed, or why it has changed. I don't know. It's silly to me. It really is. But anyway, changes in flight models, there's a bunch of them, have a look. The only thing that I can talk about, which I think I've really seen, is that with damage models with planes, it seems like with fighters you can at least take a bit more damage, a little bit more damage. There is definitely fire issues with certain planes, but there always is. But you seem to be able to take a bit more damage, therefore you can actually get back to base if you're hurt, which is nice, instead of just being unbalanced and not being able to go. This has happened with a a lot of planes that I've flown. Maybe it's just a placebo effect, I don't know. Maybe it's just randomly happened, but it seems to be doing okay. So there's a bunch of changes to ground vehicles, but the thing is, there's no point in really discussing any of them because, as I said, they've provided sources, and many of these are just T-34 changes. So, you know, if you're a T-34 fan, have a look at them. If you're not, it doesn't really matter. The only significant thing is that the M46 and the M46 Tiger have their heat shell now, which should be very useful in higher tier battles. Or it may not. We'll have a look. And also the added ability for the M41 and SPAA M42 to perform a neutral turn. Always nice to see. Kinda useless, but always nice. And also the Hurricane Mark IV, it's got two 7.7 Browning machine guns being added to it. Now, I'm pretty sure this is because of a variant of the Hurricane, which the Mark IV obviously is. I'll just have a look, because the Mark IV is the one with the two 40mm. It could also carry the rockets, but I've never read anywhere that it had 7.7s on it. So I don't know where they've got that from, and the fact that they haven't given me a source for this means that they've either, you know, they've obviously read it somewhere, because this isn't like a balance change, because 277s aren't going to make a plane amazing, especially a ground attacker. I don't know. I would like to see a source. If anybody knows if the Hurricane Mark IV had an additional two 7.7 Browning machine guns, because the only ones I've seen of the Hurricane Mark IV have the two 40mm, and that's it. So if you have a source, show me. I'd love to see it. I really would. Knowledge is power and all that jazz. So, but apart from that, a bunch of stuff with the T-34s. Once again, they've provided their sources, of course, which is nice. All Russian, of course, so have fun reading them. There's a bunch of interface stuff, which is, you know, I mean, it's how it is. It's the same every update. You get new interface things. I'm not too bothered about it. It seems to all work. There seems to be no issues, so therefore no point in having a go. Control. They've added a bunch of stuff, which basically means that you could turn off certain gunners in your aircraft. That's obviously never going to be used, because, well, AI gunners are great, and why would you want them turned off? I have no idea. You also have the ability to control the camera in the hangar, so that's always fun. It's easier to put on decals on your vehicles now, so good for you. I hope you have fun with that. A bunch of new sounds have been added, and after that update, which they added in a bunch of the new weapon sounds and stuff like that, especially the 20mm, like the Shavak, the Japanese ones, the Hispanos, and everything like that. So the biggest sound update, I think, was for me personally, was when an aircraft is near you and you can hear it near you, or if it goes past you, you hear the aircraft going, and I think that's absolutely grand. Now, because of that, I trust Gaijin with sound when it comes to their games and when it comes to whatever they produce, because it has been shown to me through their dev blogs and through certain posts they've done. They've actually gone out and recorded, they've recorded World War II vehicles and post World War II vehicles, and they've implemented them in the game. So, for me personally, I have no issue with anything they want to do with sound design. I think it's some of the best sound design that I've actually listened to in game. It creates a great atmosphere and everything like that, and it's always nice to see little things added, especially when it comes to dubbing in certain languages. They've added a bunch of basically languages to the game to help it out. They've also added stuff to the PS4, which is nice to see, but it's basically just keeping it up to the level of the PC when it comes to. They've added the internet radio thing. Not really a useful feature for many, but sometimes I use it, especially to listen to like stuff back home. The fixed freezers, they've Use display area settings instead of a fixed 90% border. That's always nice, depending on what screen you have. Fixed customization interface, applying decals when using gamepad. Always nice. Always nice to see just little stuff which caters to the PS4. Because it seems to be a large community, and it seems to be growing, so that's always good. And for the PC, the last thing is these Steam achievements. So, conclusion. I like this update. I think I have a lot more positive stuff to say about it than negative. I'm not happy with some of the decisions they've made when it comes to the money-making aspect of the game, such as how a lot of these vehicles added to the game are premium, especially when you look at the British stuff. I think the way that they've handled that is completely ridiculous. I want to see what happens with the limited vehicles, if you can actually earn them or if you just have to buy them. The 2 maps that they've introduced, I'm mostly happy with. There's a few issues, but mostly they're good. The mechanics that they've added, I think is, once again, a lot of them are a step in the right direction, but they're not there yet, so hopefully they get there. I am pissed about the AP shell crap when it comes to it, because of the percentages they've used. But, apart from that, everything else is okay. Gaijin, if any of you are watching this, which I really doubt, but if one of you is, please, for the love of God, do not try and balance this game when it comes to trying to deal with historical stuff, right? I know that sentence doesn't make a lot of sense, so let me explain it. This game is touted as one of the best World War II games out there, and a lot of people talk about how historically inaccurate it is, in a lot of regards. But then if you ask them what game does it better, they come up with a game which does one thing better, which they talk about, but it does 100 other things a lot worse than War Thunder. This game in itself is a decent representation of how World War II would have been fought if the skirmish idea was what you're looking at in parts of World War II, and if skirmishes were happening. Obviously you don't have the big scale or anything like that, but when it comes to just plane on plane combat or tank on plane or tank on tank combat, it makes sense. But please do not balance the game using unhistorical values, using percentages, using basically stuff which was never there in real life. You know for a fact what the armor penetrations of certain guns are, and certain shells. Please do not make them unhistorical, because then you destroy the appeal that this game has to a lot of people. If they want a game like that, they go and play World of Tanks, or they go and play Armored Warfare, or something like that. But for this game, a lot of people play it because it looks nice, it's free to play, it's a lot of people are interested in World War II, there's a lot of vehicles, it's supposed to be historical and everything like that. And if you take away that historical aspect, you are going to lose a lot of players, because they're just going to play other games which do what you are proposing better, because they have done it for years. I'll catch you next time.